Good morning. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you for the introduction. And yeah, I join you here from Toronto in Canada. It's not too cold anymore, so life is good. I'm here in my studio. Do switch to that speaker view because then you'll get the full experience here. I'll be sharing a number of statistics and videos and ideas about where the future of global recruiting is actually going. And I'm a futurist, so I help my clients look out 5, 10, 20 plus years into the future so they can do better strategic planning today. And a core part of being a futurist is to teach my clients and my partners about shifting their mindset. And that's the title of this presentation, shifting the mindset from what is, what's happening today and the short-term view, to what if, the longer-term view, what's likely to happen in 10, 20, maybe even 100 years' time, and how that's going to affect the world. When we actually look to that future, we can bring evidence back from those future narratives we can imagine back to today to strengthen our business and to exponentially grow the opportunities that are available to us. Now, there's going to be some Q&A at the end, so do drop any questions you have as we go through the presentation into the chat box, and we'll get to that as well. So I'm looking forward to this presentation. I spent hours going through some really cool articles, information, research, and I want to get into it. So about the age of 8 years old, I learned how to program a computer. My father gave me this book. It's the Osborne Book of the Future. Sort of ignited that passion and curiosity for what might be in that future, whether it's space travel, intergalactic travel, whether it's mining under the sea, or whether it's global dynamics and changes in transportation like the Hyperloop, which was certainly invented and thought about back in the 1970s. And that ignited a new way of thinking for me. And throughout my career, I've thought a lot about how the world has changed before I think about how the world is likely to change. And that brings me to talk about industrial revolutions. So about 280 years ago, there were 3 dimensions of change. The first industrial revolution, we saw huge changes in communications, energy, and transportation. Those 3 areas coming together with innovations, exponential change, and society growing really pushed us forward into our industrial world and the industrial complex that we find ourselves in. And today we find ourselves in what we call the 4th industrial revolution. Everything is connected by the internet. We've got automated transportation, renewable energy. We've got communications that run faster than we've ever seen before. I mean, who reads the news before they read social media? So we live in interesting times, and we live in times that are exponentially faster than they were 10 years ago. But let's look at some global shifts, and let's see how the world is moving to really ground us in understanding how our industry is going to shift as well. One of the most important things to understand is the global power dynamics are going to be defined by this. This is the water, food, energy nexus. So water is a scarce resource ultimately around the world. It's going to become even more valuable. It's going to be one of the big geopolitical theaters. And with that comes food and energy because they're inherently reliant on the availability of water. So we're going to see a lot of boom time in jobs relating to these 3 areas. I talk to farmers and agriculturalists, agri-tech startups. I talk to people in energy all of the time, and it's incredibly exciting, but it's also incredibly fragile. And we've seen some of that fragility recently. You probably saw the news was dominated by the mega container ship, the Ever Given, being stuck in the Suez Canal for 6-7 days. We saw over 360 ships backlogged. $9.9 billion in global trade was halted. And now, whilst it's freed, it's still kept there hostage in the Suez Canal because it's the people that run the Suez Canal are looking for like $1 billion in damages. But what it really showed us was the fragility in supply chains. And supply chains, I think, underpin every single job that we do in this world. Digital has made it easier, but there's still goods that are getting around the world, and there's still a huge amount of the economy that's driven this way. So one ship can cause that much disruption. So we have to be careful about how we operate in the world and who we place in companies, because these are the people that are the gateholders and the guardians for making sure that the world's trade flows and we can innovate going forward. And when I think about innovation, I talk about Dator's for futures. James Dator is a university professor at the University of Hawaii, one of the big progenitors of modern foresight and futurist thinking, and he came up with the 4 futures. Now, as companies, we're either continuing to grow, we're transforming, we're getting stronger, or we suddenly hit our limits and we start to decline, and that decline could even mean that companies could collapse, and we've seen that before. Jeff Bezos calls this the difference between day 1 and day 2. Day 1, you're always agile, you're customer focused, you're always making a difference, you're always changing, and you're really driving forward for growth. Day 2 is collapse after a slow, painful decline because you've stopped as a business. It's what he calls stasis. You've stopped. You don't want to find the people that just believe that the world's changing at a slow pace. You want to find the people that really want to make a big difference as we push forward with progress, with humanity. And really that progress is starting to shift to Asia. By 2030, we're going to see China followed by India, then the US as the 3 largest global economies. That shift to Asia is super important because in the top 10, top 20 of the largest economies around the world, a huge amount of them are going to gather around India and China as sort of the power brokers. And there's going to be these new sort of ringleaders of the modern global economy. So we're going to start to see a huge amount of economic activity there, and a huge amount of economic activity in Africa as well. And 35% of global GDP is going to come from Asia by 2030. That's a huge shift. And whilst we've seen the West being incredibly powerful to this point, this shift is going to be notable. This is going to be geopolitical. The jobs around the world are going to shift. Resources are going to move around as well. So let's take a look at what's happening. Well, what's really interesting is the global population is changing drastically. In the East and the West, we're seeing population decline. But what we're seeing is boom time in sub-Saharan Africa. I think Africa is one of the most exciting countries in the world. And if we look at some of the stats, in 2025, we still see some North America, we see some Asian sort of powerhouses around population and where that is. But we're starting to see as we go into 2050, it starts concentrating a little bit more around India and Africa. And you go out to 2100, and this is data from the United Nations, and the University of Toronto has done some further projections as well. We're seeing a huge amount of power brokerage move into Africa. And I think that Africa is going to be really exciting. By 2100, they think that Lagos is going to be the largest city in the world with 88.3 million people. And that's pretty significant. That's not just a mega city. That's something over and beyond. But what we're seeing today, and you've probably seen this in your jobs, you're placing people from countries like China and India and Africa into Western countries and vice versa. And that's going to continue. But I think what's going to happen is those resources are going to come to the East and the West. They're going to learn the information. They're going to become more entrepreneurial, more exponential in the way that they work. And they're going to bring that back to sub-Saharan Africa by the middle of the century. Okay. What's the evolution of the industrial revolutions? Well, I call this infinite humanity. And what we do is we add an extra dimension to this, which is biology and ecology. So now we're adding to communications, energy, transportation, our own biology. That biology, the way that we operate in the world, the genetics, the genetic editing, the huge amount of crisis and opportunities we see in wellness and health around the world, especially at times like this in the pandemic, is just going to really make the global economy really boom time. And what's interesting is that this, if you're not thinking about wellness and health as a major sector for recruitment, then it's time to definitely step up into that, because there's going to be a huge amount of wealth there. The longevity marketplace in health and wellness is predicted to be $27 trillion in size by the middle of the 2020s. So huge amounts of opportunity there. But really, we're seeing that software is eating the world, and one of the great tech protagonists and investors, Mark Andreessen, said this back in the late 90s. And what he really means is this. Well, there's a lot of fact and a little bit of fiction in there as well. That Amazon blimp doesn't quite exist yet, but there are patents in the works, the nanotechnology robots that are healing cancer. That's still in the laboratory, that's happening in R&D. But over the last 25 years, we've seen a huge explosion in technology. Here are some of the apps and platforms that you probably are aware of and you use every single day. And this is everything from new kinds of cryptocurrency and banking solutions, through to space travel, through to social media. 25 years ago, social media didn't really exist like it is today. And what's interesting about that is the exceptional growth in the world. Technology certainly has become a backbone of everything that we think about. Okay, let's get into the future workforce and start thinking about how the leaders out there are starting to think. Now, there's a huge opportunity in thinking to be future ready, and 98% of executives plan to redesign their organizations to make them fit for tomorrow. So everything from upskilling and reskilling, the resources that we're placing in places willing to unlearn and relearn is going to be super important as well. But really, there's one particular concept that I talk about with companies. A lot of large consultancies go into large companies that are starting to feel behind the times, is the idea of being bionic. And being bionic is taking control of your behavioral, your cognitive, and your network capital. Behavioral capital is about tracking that ongoing activities, understanding what your workforce is doing. Then you're really working out cognitively what they're doing. What's the value in the algorithms within the jobs and the people, and how artificial intelligence and data works with them. And then you've got the network, the connections between the people and systems that really provide value. And this goes on top of the layer of what comes with normal business. So it doesn't just replace old ways of working, but there's a revolution towards having systems, towards having processes, and new thinking and philosophies to make businesses exponentially grow. If you look at the top 5 wealthiest and largest companies by market cap in the world, they're all bionic companies, and that's who we can look to for inspirations of how to work. But really, at the basis of that, and I've been working in data for over 25 years, is building those systems where we collect data, we turn that into useful information. That information gets translated into knowledge. And ultimately, I think that we're headed into a wisdom economy. And wisdom is something that's inherently human, and it's something that comes from base data information and knowledge, and from the network of us working together in a bionic way. And everything is going to be underpinned by artificial intelligence. That's the AI here. And artificial intelligence is seen to provide a $15, $20 trillion impact to the global economy by 2030. And that's because of productivity and efficiency, and being able to really remove sort of the drudge work from those algorithmic tasks that we undertake. But there's a really interesting perspective here. It doesn't move people out of the way. It doesn't destroy jobs like some of the narrative tells us. The IA stands for intelligence augmentation. This is about human and the machine. Going forward, you're going to find people that can work with data, that can work alongside artificially intelligent systems and make businesses more effective, more exponential, more efficient, and better than before. And that's where we come back to with infinite humanity. The infinite humanity is a really important concept to understand, because the biological, ecological aspects really kick in and add to the data around automation, around global supergrids for energy, and around that exponential communication. Another thing that's going to be a big game changer in the world is going to be the circular economy. It's the idea of reducing and reusing and recycling what we use. This is a huge multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. We're going to see a lot of businesses aiming for zero waste, zero carbon, and the sustainability is probably going to be one of the biggest trends for the next 10 years. And it's more essential than ever before. The planet is warming. We're producing more waste than ever. We really need to get on top of that. In addition to that, we also need to think about what's going to be happening with things like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as well. So if you haven't read about the UN's SDGs, go away and do that. And the post-keynote report that I provided with you has got a link in there. It's got a link to all of the other areas I've been talking about as well. Go and take a look, because businesses are really hanging their hats on these ESG pillars to their organization. So they're really working out how to be sustainable and how to create a better world together. And there's a huge amount of opportunity just by following those SDGs. And in the world of recruitment, that's 380 million more jobs and $12 trillion in business savings globally by 2030. Now, there's lots of figures and facts that I'm putting in this presentation, and I've gone into the research. You know, is this going to be the truth? Well, one thing that we know is that big changes are coming, and it's going to affect what we do for a living and the people that we serve. Okay, let's think about what I do, which is strategic foresight. And it's a burgeoning capability within companies. Over the past 8 years alone, I've worked with over 300 companies to help them think forward about how the world is changing. And some of the largest trillion-dollar companies in the world are now coming to me and saying, can you help us think more strategically, but in a longer-term sense? Once we imagine the future, we can build a bigger vision, strengthen strategic planning, and anticipate risks today. I simplistically put this together in my framework, and there are many frameworks for strategic foresight and futurist work out there. But I like to base everything in humanity, not in technology, because humanity is the most important. Plurality, inclusion, and equity. Everyone needs to be part of the solution. Everyone needs to be rewarded for the growth in the world. Scientific fact and creativity. We have to fight the false facts. And then we look at the signals of change. This presentation showed you a number of those signals. Hypothetical scenarios, you know, writing stories, making video. The video part of this presentation was a hypothetical scenario of a modern world. And speculative fiction, we've all watched science fiction movies, looking at them across a number of dimensions, and then projecting into the future and bringing that evidence and backcasting to today. So that's it, from what is to what if. How do you shift your mindset? How do you look to the future? Today, I've covered a few things that I think that are really important in just a short 20 minutes of the presentation. So think about that transformation and that opportunity and try and work against what decline and collapse could look like. Remember, Asia's coming and the dynamics of the world is changing, and then Africa's coming as well. Think about the exponential technologies that surround us. Notice how it's changing the way that you operate and the people that you interview and the people that you place. Then think about how the bionic companies are starting to take over the world and how your clients can start thinking differently. And then think about how foresight can help you with your practice. You know, just imagine, what if the world changed in 2025, 2030, and what you did today is completely different. It's fun to think about, but it's essential to think about it as well. So that's it. That's from what is to what if, shifting our mindsets to see exponential futures. And I'd love to take some of your questions now. Thank you.